Of our two readings for Mass today, I'm going to focus on the first reading from the Hebrew Scriptures because it gives us a great set of insights, I think, or could, as to something we've inherited from our elder siblings in faith, from the Jewish people, about the paradox of encountering a God who wants to be our friend and be with us as closely as possible, and yet at the same time is still God, still beyond our imagination, beyond our words, beyond our experience. And so we have here the story of Moses that we've been reading in the last week or so in the Mass anyway. Moses is encountering God face to face, and it even says that they talk to each other one person would to another, like friends. And at the same time, we then get this other paragraph where we talk about the way in which God is entirely other, entirely beyond us. And the lectionary is a little misleading here in that this happens in two places. The first part of today's reading happens in this tent that Moses has set up just outside of the camp where God's presence comes and is with him. And the second happens in up on the mountain again, up on Mount Sinai, back where Moses goes back to encounter. He asks to have a vision of the full glory of God. And so in the first part of this, we see Moses talking with God, kind of hanging out, and the way in which God comes down to his level. And I think it's a good indicator of how God comes down to our level. The mystic Julian of Norwich talked about how God becomes homely with us, meaning God comes and makes a home, comes and hangs out with us like a king pretending to be a peasant for the day. And in the second reading, we have this slightly more scary scene where Moses says God's name, and then God responds with his name, the Lord, a merciful and gracious God. And Moses falls to his feet, falls to his face, it says, in a moment of worship. Now, we need to step back a minute and think about that name. So one of the gifts of the Jewish people has been their reverence for the holy name of God given to Moses. And so it's that name, those strange four Hebrew letters, YHWH, that sometimes Christians will pronounce, but our Jewish siblings don't. And in fact, they don't even print it without sometimes putting the word God with a dash between. You wouldn't just casually say the name of God because it's God. Instead, you use a circumlocution like the Lord or the Holy One or the name. I explain to my students, it's kind of like Voldemort, you know who, but for good reasons. But there's still a way in which God, as God is described here as the Lord, a merciful and gracious God that Moses kind of falls to his feet, falls to his face in front of, a little scary. There's a famous saying in C.S. Lewis's The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, talking about Aslan the lion, who's kind of the Christ figure throughout this. Oh, well, he's not safe. He's not a tame lion, but he is good. And that's what this text kind of gets, that image of God, that awareness of God as a God who wants to be our friend, yes, but a God who is still the Lord, the Holy One of Israel, the one beyond our power to even imagine. Now, where are you in your journey, your imagination of God? So some of you may have been raised with an image of God like that second one, a God who was always terrifying, a God who was always scary, a God who was always too intense. And if that's the case, then take some comfort from this first part of an idea of God who wants to be your friend, of an idea of God who wants to be part of our community, who wants to come down to our level and speak with us face to face. But my experience, at least, was very much of I got a lot of the understanding of God as who wants to be our friend, who wants to hang out, the kind of puppies and flowers God. But it might be a helpful correction for some of us raised in that way of being Christian, or that way of being religious, to have a little more awareness of, well, God's supposed to be kind of scary at times. Not scary in the sense of out to get you, but scary in the sense of you should be aware of the ocean when you go to the beach and how dangerous it can be. You should be thinking carefully before you climb Mount Everest. That God is so much more than our imagination, that God and God's name deserve a bit of respect. Now, the trick is, and the difficulty is, to somehow keep both of those together. Keep both of those together, our understanding of who God is and who God wants to be with us. A God at once who is the all-powerful, all-knowing creator of the universe, who wants to come down and hang out with us. That's in some ways a description of what Christians will call the incarnation of a God who is the all-powerful word by which the universe was created, and yet at the same time becomes a vulnerable human baby in a manger and crucified criminal on the cross. How do we put that together in our own relationship with God? In some ways, that's your job for today, perhaps, is to think, well, where is my imagination of God on this point in my journey? How do I revere the holy name of God and come to God with an adequate sense of awe and respect, and yet not let that push out the fact that God, the most powerful part of God, is not just God having a lot of physical power or being able to cause earthquakes. The most powerful part of God is God's love, God's mercy, the fact that God has more mercy than we can comprehend and more love for us than we can comprehend. And so even if God is not a tame lion or safe, God is yet the God who loves us passionately, powerfully, and irrevocably. Blessed be the name of the Lord.